Story number one. It started subtly, as these things often do. A like on a photo from 3 years ago on Instagram, a comment on a public Facebook post, something generic like, great pic. I didn't think much of it at first. Just some random guy on the internet, probably bored, scrolling through my profile. I get those all the time. I'm a pretty private person online, but I have a public Instagram for my photography and a Facebook page I use to keep in touch with old friends and family. His name was Mark, and his profile was pretty bare. A few photos of him hiking, a generic profile picture, and not much else. No mutual friends, no real connections. I just ignored it. Then came the messages. At first, they were innocuous. Hey, I really like your photography. You have a great eye. I'm also into hiking. Maybe we could go sometime. Again, I brushed it off. I'm polite, so I responded with a simple thank you, hoping he'd get the hint. But he didn't. The messages kept coming more frequently now, and they were getting more personal. He started commenting on specific details in my photos, things that only someone who had really studied them would notice. I love the way you captured the light in that forest shot. The composition in this portrait is perfect. It was flattering, I guess, but also unnerving. How much time was this guy spending looking at my stuff? Then came the realization that he knew where I was. I posted a photo of a coffee shop I was working in, just a quick snap of my latte with the shop's logo visible in the background. Within minutes, I got a message from Mark. I love that coffee shop. It's so cozy. He lived in the same city as me, so I chalked it up to coincidence. But the next day, I got another message. I saw you at the farmer's market today. You were wearing a blue dress. I hadn't posted anything about being at the farmer's market. How could he have known? That's when the fear started to creep in. I blocked him on all my social media accounts, hoping that would be the end of it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was probably just a coincidence, that he would get bored and move on. But I was wrong. A few days later, I started getting emails, anonymous emails with no subject line and only a single sentence in the body. I know where you live. My blood ran cold. I called the police, but they said there was nothing they could do. No threats had been made, no laws had been broken. They told me to keep a log of all the incidents and to call them if anything escalated. But the emails kept coming, each one more unsettling than the last. I see you walking your dog in the park. I know what time you leave for work. I'm watching you. I was terrified. I started looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. I changed my routine, took different routes to work, and avoided going out alone. I installed security cameras in my apartment and bought a can of pepper spray. I felt like I was living in a horror movie, constantly waiting for the boogeyman to jump out from the shadows. One night, I was coming home from work late. It was raining, and the streets were deserted. As I walked up to my apartment building, I noticed someone standing across the street under a streetlight. It was a man, and he was staring directly at me. I couldn't see his face clearly in the darkness, but something about his posture, his stance, sent a shiver down my spine. I fumbled with my keys, trying to get into the building as quickly as possible. As I reached the door, I heard him call out my name, my full name, the one I rarely use. I ran inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it. I sprinted up the stairs to my apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. I locked the door, double-locked it, and chained it shut. I peered through the peephole, but he was gone. I spent the rest of the night, huddled in my apartment, listening to every creak and groan of the building, convinced that he was going to break in at any moment. The next morning, I went to the police station again, desperate for help. I showed them the emails, told them about the man outside my apartment. This time, they took me more seriously. They sent a patrol car to my apartment building to keep an eye on things, and they started investigating the emails. They traced the IP address to a burner phone, but it was a dead end. A few days later, I got a package in the mail. It was a small, unmarked box. I hesitated to open it, fearing what might be inside. Finally, I worked up the courage and carefully opened the box. Inside, there was a single photograph. It was a picture of me sleeping in my bed. I screamed. I dropped the box and stumbled back, my mind reeling. How could he have gotten into my apartment? How could he have taken that picture without me knowing? I called the police again, hysterical. This time, they sent a detective to my apartment. He dusted for fingerprints, took photos of the scene, and promised to do everything he could to find the person responsible. I couldn't stay in my apartment anymore. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. I felt like I was being hunted, like I was constantly being watched. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I was terrified to leave the house. The detective called me a week later with news. They had identified the stalker. It was Mark, the guy from social media. They had tracked him down to his apartment and they found evidence linking him to the emails, the package, and the man outside my building. They arrested him and he was charged with stalking and harassment. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. Even with him in jail, I still felt like I wasn't safe. I knew he would eventually get out, and I was terrified of what he would do when he did. I decided to move, to start a new life somewhere where he would never find me. I sold my apartment, quit my job, and moved to a different state. I changed my name, deleted all my social media accounts, and cut off contact with everyone I knew. I wanted to disappear. It's been 5 years since then, and I still look over my shoulder everywhere I go. I still have nightmares about him, about his eyes, about his voice. I know he's probably out there somewhere, living his life, but I can't shake the feeling that he's still watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I'll never feel safe again. The sense of security I had known was stolen away from me the day a stranger commented on my photo. It's a chilling reminder of how easily our lives can be invaded, how vulnerable we are to those who seek to do us harm. And the scariest part of it all? It really happened. To me. Story 2. Okay, so this is still hard to talk about, even after all this time. It started subtly, like a misplaced item or a feeling of being watched. I brushed it off as stress, a side effect of living alone in a city I didn't know that well. I was working as a freelance graphic designer back then, mostly from home, which meant I spent a lot of time online and even more time staring out the window. I needed the light, inspiration and all that. I lived on the third floor of this old brownstone. Great natural light, but the windows faced a pretty busy street. The first thing I noticed was my mail being rearranged. I had one of those old school mailboxes, the kind with the slots on the outside of the building. I'd get my mail in the evening, and a few times I noticed the junk mail was on top instead of the actual letters. Small thing, right? Annoying, but not exactly criminal. I figured it was just the mailman being careless. Then came the groceries. I always ordered from the same online service, and they always left the bags right outside my door. One day, I came home to find a bag of groceries I hadn't ordered. Weird, but maybe a neighbor mixed up their order with mine? I checked the label. It had my name and apartment number. Inside, there was milk, I'm lactose intolerant, a loaf of white bread, I'm gluten-free, and a package of cheap hot dogs, I'm a vegetarian. It was like someone was intentionally buying the opposite of what I would ever eat. That's when the unease really started to creep in. I changed my online passwords, double-checked my door locks, and started being more aware of my surroundings when I went out. I even mentioned it to my super, but he just shrugged it off. City life, he said. You get used to it. But it didn't stop. It escalated. One morning, I woke up to find my front door slightly ajar. Just a crack, but enough to send a jolt of pure terror through me. Nothing seemed to be missing, but the feeling of violation was overwhelming. I called the police, but they couldn't do much without any signs of forced entry. They took a report, told me to get a better lock, and left. I invested in a security system with a camera and motion sensors. It was expensive, but I couldn't sleep at night without it. For a few weeks, things were quiet. I started to relax, to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. Then the packages started arriving. Small, wrapped boxes with no return address. Inside, there were things like a single-used glove, a child's lost button, and a bird's feather. Each item was more unsettling than the last, like clues in some sick game. I didn't touch them. I put them in a box and took them to the police station. Again, they took a report, but there was nothing they could do. The camera footage became my obsession. Every night, I'd replay the recordings, looking for any sign of who was doing this. Days turned into weeks. Then one night, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing in the hallway outside my door, bathed in the eerie glow of the emergency exit sign. They were wearing a dark hoodie and their face was obscured by the shadows. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at my door. Then they reached into their pocket and pulled out something small and shiny, a knife. I screamed and called the police. They arrived within minutes, but the figure was gone. They reviewed the footage, and this time they took it seriously. They increased patrols in the area and promised to do everything they could to find the person in the hoodie. But it was too late. The fear had consumed me. I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. I broke my lease and moved in with a friend in another part of the city. I thought I was safe, that I had finally escaped. I was wrong. A few weeks later, I was walking home from work when I saw him. He was across the street, leaning against a lamppost. The same dark hoodie, the same chilling stillness. Our eyes met, and he smiled. Not a friendly smile, but a predatory grin that sent shivers down my spine. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, weaving through the crowds, desperate to lose him. I didn't stop running until I reached my friend's apartment building. I collapsed inside, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face. I called the police again, but this time they seemed annoyed. They said I was being hysterical, that I couldn't be sure it was the same person. They took another report, but I knew they wouldn't do anything. I realized I was on my own. I had to protect myself. I started carrying pepper spray and a taser. I avoided walking alone at night. I changed my routine constantly. I was living in a constant state of fear. Um, then, one night, I got a message on social media. It was an anonymous account with no profile picture. The message simply read, "I'm always watching." I deleted my social media accounts, changed my phone number, and went into hiding. I stayed with different friends, never staying in one place for more than a few days. I was living like a fugitive. I know he's still out there. I can feel it. Every time I see a dark hoodie, every time I hear a strange noise, my heart races with fear. I'll never be truly safe again. It's a terrifying realization that my life will never go back to normal. Story number 3. I never imagined I'd be telling this story. Not because I thought I was immune to such things, but because the sheer suffocating dread it instilled felt too personal, too raw to ever share. It started subtly, like a creeping vine slowly tightening around my life, choking the air out of normalcy. I was a junior in college, enjoying the relative freedom of campus life, buried in books and late-night study sessions. My routine was predictable: library until midnight, a quick walk back to my dorm, and then a few hours of sleep before the cycle began again. The first sign was a simple note tucked under my dorm room door. A single white piece of paper, folded neatly in half, with a message scrawled in messy, almost frantic handwriting. "You looked beautiful in the library today." I brushed it off. College campuses are full of harmless admirers, right? Maybe it was a misplaced attempt at a compliment from a shy classmate. I tossed it in the trash and forgot about it. But then came the flowers. A small bouquet of lilies appeared on my desk, their pungent fragrance filling the room. There was no card, no note, just the flowers. This time, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. It felt too deliberate, too knowing. I asked around, showed the flowers to my friends, but no one claimed responsibility. Again, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone got the room number wrong. Maybe it was a secret admirer with terrible taste in gifts. The incidents escalated slowly, insidiously. A coffee cup with my name on it, left outside my dorm room, even though I hadn't ordered coffee. A book I'd mentioned in passing to a friend left on my doorstep. Each event was seemingly harmless on its own, easily explained away. But together they formed a chilling pattern, a constant reminder that someone was watching me, paying attention to details I didn't even realize I was broadcasting. The feeling of being observed became unbearable. I started checking over my shoulder constantly, scanning crowds, peering into the shadows. Sleep became a luxury I could barely afford, plagued by nightmares of faceless figures lurking just out of sight. The joy I once found in my studies was replaced by a gnawing anxiety that followed me everywhere. Then came the messages. They started as anonymous texts, compliments on my outfit, observations about my day. "That blue dress looks stunning on you." "I saw you studying in the library. You looked so focused." They grew increasingly personal, referencing conversations I'd had with friends, details about my family. The realization that this person knew me, knew my life, sent a jolt of pure terror through me. I went to the campus police, showed them the notes, the flowers, the messages. They were sympathetic, but their hands were tied. There was no direct threat, no evidence of a crime. They advised me to be cautious, to avoid walking alone at night, to report anything suspicious. Their words offered little comfort. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of paranoia, with no one to throw me a lifeline. One night, after a particularly grueling study session, I decided to walk back to my dorm with a friend. The campus was deserted, the only sound the crunch of our footsteps on the pavement. As we approached my dorm, I noticed a figure standing in the shadows near the entrance. He was tall, cloaked in darkness, his face obscured by a baseball cap. My blood ran cold. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that it was him. My friend noticed my fear, grabbed my arm, and hurried me inside. I locked the door, heart pounding, and peered through the peephole. The figure was still there, motionless, watching. I called the campus police again, my voice trembling. They arrived quickly, but the figure was gone. They searched the area but found nothing. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the shadows dance on the lawn, convinced that he was still out there, waiting. The next morning, I woke to find another note slipped under my door. This one was different. The handwriting was the same, but the message was chillingly direct. I'm tired of watching from a distance. I want to be closer to you. That was the breaking point. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly looking over my shoulder, terrified of the unknown. I packed my bags, withdrew from my classes, and went home. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my parents. I needed to disappear, to break free from the suffocating grip of my stalker. I stayed with my aunt in a small, isolated town in the mountains, far away from everything and everyone I knew. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and tried to rebuild my life. For a while, it worked. The fear began to subside, replaced by a fragile sense of peace. But then, one day, I went to the local grocery store. As I was checking out, I noticed a familiar figure standing in line behind me. He was wearing the same baseball cap, the same dark clothing. His face was still obscured, but I knew it was him. He had found me. I panicked, dropped my groceries, and ran. I ran through the store, out into the parking lot, and into the woods behind the store. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, but I didn't stop. I knew he was following me. I could feel his presence like a cold hand on my back. I finally collapsed behind a fallen tree, gasping for air. I looked back, but he wasn't there. I waited, listening for any sign of him, but all I could hear was the rustling of the leaves and the pounding of my heart. I thought I had lost him. Then I heard a voice behind me. I told you I wanted to be closer. I turned around, and there he was. He stepped out of the shadows, his face finally revealed. It was someone I knew, someone I had trusted, someone I never suspected. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Now we can finally be together. I don't know what happened after that. I don't remember anything. All I know is that I woke up in a hospital bed weeks later with no memory of the events that followed. The police told me that I had been found unconscious in the woods, suffering from severe head trauma. My stalker was gone. They never found him. To this day, I live with the knowledge that he is still out there somewhere, watching me. And I know, with a certainty that haunts my every waking moment, that he will find me again. Some people can't resist getting to know others, even in the most terrible ways. Story number 4. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a faint hum beneath the surface of my life. I barely registered it at first, dismissing it as stress or paranoia. I was a junior in college, living off campus in a small, slightly rundown apartment. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, a space I'd worked hard to afford. I walked to campus every day, the same route, past the same houses with their carefully manicured lawns. The first thing I noticed was a car, a dark sedan, I think it was a Ford, always parked a block or two from my building. It wasn't always there, but often enough to catch my attention. I'd see it in my rearview mirror on my way to my internship. I'd catch it parked outside the coffee shop I frequented on Saturday mornings. I thought it was odd, but I chalked it up to coincidence. I mean, it was a public street, people parked there all the time. Then came the messages. Not direct messages, but subtle ones. Lyrics from songs I'd mentioned in passing to friends, posted on public forums I frequented. articles about topics I'd been researching for class shared on my social media feed by accounts I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was just the algorithm being creepy, but the synchronicities became too frequent, too specific to ignore. One afternoon, I found a small, hand drawn picture tucked under my windshield wiper. Uh, it was a sketch of my cat Mittens curled up in my favorite armchair. I hadn't shown that picture to anyone. I hadn't posted it online, and a wave of cold dread washed over me. This wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate. I started changing my routines. I took different routes to campus, varied my coffee shop visits, stopped sharing personal details online. I told my roommate, Sarah, about what was happening. She tried to reassure me, saying I was probably just being paranoid, that it was probably just some harmless admirer. But she saw the look in my eyes, the fear that was starting to consume me. She agreed to walk with me to class and back, just in case. The car was still there. No matter which route I took, no matter what time I left, I'd see it, lurking in the distance, a dark shadow on the edge of my vision. It was like it was taunting me, reminding me that I couldn't escape. I started having trouble sleeping. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window sent my heart racing. I'd lie awake for hours, listening, waiting, convinced that someone was watching me. One night, I woke up to a scratching sound at my window. I sat bolt upright in bed, my breath catching in my throat. I strained my ears, trying to identify the source of the noise. It came again, a low, insistent scratching, like fingernails on glass. I slowly reached for the lamp on my bedside table, my hand trembling. I flicked it on, and the room flooded with light. I peered cautiously through the blinds, my eyes scanning the darkness outside. At first, I saw nothing, just the familiar shapes of the trees in the park across the street. But then I saw it, a figure standing in the shadows just beyond the reach of the streetlight. It was a man, tall and gaunt, his face obscured by the darkness. He was staring directly at my window. I gasped and stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my fingers fumbling with the buttons. I managed to stammer out my address and a brief description of what was happening before my voice gave out. I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder, closer. The figure outside my window didn't move. He just stood there, watching, his presence radiating a chilling sense of menace. I felt like he was looking directly at me, waiting. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness. They swarmed the park, searching for the man, but he was gone, vanished without a trace. I spent the rest of the night at the police station, giving my statement. They took the sketch of my cat as evidence, promised to increase patrols in the area, but I knew it wasn't enough. I knew he was still out there, watching, waiting. The next few weeks were a blur of fear and anxiety. I barely left my apartment, relying on Sarah to bring me groceries and run errands. I jumped at every sound, every shadow. I felt like I was living in a constant state of high alert, my senses hyper-tuned to any sign of danger. The police never found the man, never identified the car. Then, one morning, I woke up to find something on my doorstep. It was a single white rose, its petals slightly wilted. Attached to the stem was a small note written in elegant cursive. It read, "I'm closer than you think." That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my bags, called my parents, and went home. I dropped out of school, left everything behind. It's been years since that night, but the memory still haunts me. I moved to a new city, changed my name, tried to start over, but I can never shake the feeling that he's still out there, somewhere, watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. My heart still races when I remember the scratching at the window, the figure in the shadows, the rose on my doorstep. I'll never forget the feeling of being hunted, of knowing that someone was obsessed with me, that someone wanted to control me. And to this day, I am scared of what is to come of me one day. I never thought I'd get stalked, but I did, and it nearly cost me my life. Story number 5. The moment I knew something was wrong was when I saw the same car parked across the street from my apartment for the third day in a row. It was a beat-up, dark blue sedan, the kind you wouldn't look twice at unless you had a reason to. And I didn't have a reason. Not yet. At first, I brushed it off. Living in a city, you see the same cars all the time. Maybe it was just a coincidence, someone visiting a neighbor, or waiting for a parking spot. But the feeling of unease grew with each passing day. It started with the car, but then it was other things. A figure standing across the street when I walked my dog at night, hang-up calls at odd hours, and whispers when I was alone in my apartment. I tried to rationalize it all. Maybe it was just my anxiety playing tricks on me, or maybe I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I was a young woman living alone in a new city, trying to make a name for myself as a writer. I loved the anonymity and the freedom, but I also knew that it made me vulnerable. I didn't have a lot of friends in the city, and my family was far away. I was on my own. I tried to ignore the feeling of being watched, but it was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. I started taking different routes home from work, varying my schedule, and being more aware of my surroundings. I even considered getting a self-defense class or buying a weapon, but I didn't want to overreact. I still didn't know for sure if I was being stalked, and I didn't want to jump to conclusions. One evening, I was working late at a coffee shop when I saw him. He was sitting at a table in the corner, watching me. It was the same guy I had seen standing across the street from my apartment. He was tall and thin, with long dark hair and piercing blue eyes. He was wearing a black hoodie and jeans, and he looked out of place in the brightly lit coffee shop. Our eyes met, and he gave me a chilling smile. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a predatory smile, like he knew something I didn't. I quickly packed up my things and left the coffee shop, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked as fast as I could, looking over my shoulder every few seconds to make sure he wasn't following me. When I got back to my apartment, I locked all the doors and windows and closed the curtains. I was terrified. I knew then that I wasn't imagining things. I was being stalked, and this guy was dangerous. I called the police and reported the incident, but they couldn't do anything without more evidence. They told me to be careful and to call them if anything else happened. I felt helpless. I was on my own and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak and groan of the building sent shivers down my spine. I kept imagining him outside my window, watching me. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly looking over my shoulder and living in fear. I needed to know who this guy was and why he was stalking me. I started doing some research. I scoured social media, searching for anyone who might fit his description. I checked local news websites and police blotters, hoping to find some information about him. But I came up empty. It was like he didn't exist. Then, one evening, I received a package in the mail. It was a small, unmarked box. I hesitated before opening it, afraid of what might be inside. When I finally mustered the courage to open the box, I found a single photograph. It was a picture of me taken through my apartment window. I was sitting at my desk, working on my computer. On the back of the photo, there was a message written in blood red ink: "I'm always watching." I screamed. I threw the box across the room and ran to the bathroom where I vomited. This was no longer just a feeling of unease or paranoia. This was real, and it was terrifying. I knew that I was in serious danger. I called the police again, and this time they took me seriously. They sent a detective to my apartment to investigate, and they promised to increase patrols in the area. But I knew that it wouldn't be enough. This guy was obsessed with me, and he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. I decided to leave the city. I couldn't stay there any longer, knowing that he was out there somewhere, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I packed my bags, gathered my belongings, and drove to my parents' house in another state. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my closest friends. I wanted to disappear, to start a new life where he couldn't find me. But even miles away, I still felt his presence. I would catch glimpses of him in crowds, see his car parked down the street, hear his whispers in the night. I knew that he was still out there, searching for me. One night, I woke up to find him standing in my bedroom. He was wearing a mask and he was holding a knife. He didn't say anything. He just stood there watching me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. He lunged at me, and I fought back with all my strength. I scratched, kicked, and bit, but he was too strong for me. He overpowered me and held the knife to my throat. "I finally found you," he whispered. "You can't run from me." And then everything went black. That was all a dream. I woke up in a cold sweat, terrified. I was still at my parents' house, safe and sound. but the dream felt so real, so vivid, that I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, somewhere. Now, even years later, I still feel paranoid and scared of the dark. Story number 6. I should have trusted my instincts when I first saw him at the library. He seemed harmless enough, just another college student hunched over textbooks, looking stressed and sleep deprived like the rest of us. But something about his eyes, they lingered a little too long, a little too intensely. I brushed it off as nerves. Maybe he was just shy and awkward. I was wrong. It started subtly. I'd notice him in the background of my vision in the coffee shop, always a few tables away, eyes fixed on me. He'd be there at the park when I went for my afternoon run, conveniently running in the same direction, never close enough to speak to, but always within sight. I thought it was just a weird coincidence at first. Maybe we just frequented the same places, but the frequency became too much to ignore. It was like he was always there. One evening, I was walking back to my apartment after a late study session. It was dark, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows. I heard footsteps behind me, quickening as I quickened my pace. I glanced back, and there he was, a figure silhouetted against the dim light. My heart leaped into my throat. I started to run. I didn't dare look back again, just focused on the pounding of my feet on the pavement, the burning in my lungs. I fumbled with my keys as I reached my apartment building, finally managing to unlock the door and slam it shut behind me. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my body trembling. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building, every rustle of leaves outside my window sent shivers down my spine. I kept imagining his face, his eyes, watching me, waiting. The next morning, I told my roommate, Sarah, everything. She tried to reassure me, said I was probably just overreacting, but she could see the fear in my eyes. She convinced me to report it to campus security. The security officers took my statement, but they didn't seem too concerned. They said they'd keep an eye out, but without any concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. I felt dismissed, helpless. I knew this wasn't just in my head. This was real, and no one was taking me seriously. Things escalated quickly after that. I started receiving anonymous messages on social media, cryptic and unsettling. They weren't overtly threatening, but they were definitely targeted at me, referencing things only someone who knew me could know. Enjoying your run today? One message read, followed by a winking emoji. Another, that new dress looks beautiful on you. The messages sent ice through my veins. He was watching me, always watching. I changed my social media settings, made everything private, blocked any suspicious accounts, but it didn't matter. The messages kept coming, finding new ways to reach me. It was like he was taunting me, proving that he could always find me, no matter what I did. One afternoon, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My heart stopped. I slowly pushed the door open, my hands shaking. The apartment was silent, but I could feel a presence, a wrongness in the air. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but then I noticed it. A small framed photo on my bedside table was turned face down. I cautiously approached the table and picked up the photo. It was a picture of me and my family taken years ago. I flipped it over, and on the back, scrawled in red ink, were the words, "I'm closer than you think." I screamed. I ran out of the apartment and didn't stop until I reached Sarah's dorm room. I was hysterical, sobbing, barely able to speak. Sarah took one look at me and knew something was terribly wrong. She called the police this time. The police took the break-in seriously, but they still couldn't identify the stalker. They dusted for fingerprints, collected the photo as evidence, but came up empty. They installed security cameras outside my apartment and advised me to get a restraining order. The restraining order did little to ease my fear. It was just a piece of paper, and I knew it wouldn't stop him if he was truly determined. I lived in constant terror, jumping at every shadow, afraid to leave my apartment. One night, I woke up to a strange noise outside my window. It sounded like scratching, like nails dragging against glass. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, listening intently. The scratching stopped, then started again, louder this time. I slowly crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. My blood ran cold. Standing in the darkness outside my window was him. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes wide and unblinking. He was holding something in his hand, something glinting in the moonlight, a knife. He smiled, a slow, chilling smile that sent shivers down my spine. He raised the knife and began to scratch something into the glass. I couldn't make out what it was at first, but as he continued to scratch, the letters became clear. My name. I screamed and stumbled back from the window, tripping over my own feet. I scrambled to my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so violently I could barely press the numbers. I managed to stammer out my address, my voice choked with fear. As I waited for the police to arrive, I could hear him outside my window, still scratching, still smiling. The sound was deafening, grating on my nerves, driving me to the brink of madness. It felt like an eternity before I heard sirens in the distance. The police arrived within minutes, swarming the building, searching for the stalker. But he was gone, vanished into the night. They found the knife, they found my name scratched into the window, but they couldn't find him. I moved away from campus that night, leaving everything behind. I changed my name, my appearance, everything. I live in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, wondering if he's still out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I should have trusted my instincts. Now, I might never truly feel safe again. To this day, I get chills remembering the way he looked at me, the way his smile never reached his eyes. I tried to brush it off, but I wish I hadn't. If you ever get that feeling, that sense of dread, don't ignore it. Trust your gut. It might just save your life. Story number 7. I'd seen him around for weeks, just a fleeting glimpse here and there, enough to register him in my subconscious. A guy with a shaved head and intense eyes, always wearing the same faded black hoodie. I live in a pretty dense urban area, so seeing the same faces now and then isn't exactly unusual. I chalked it up to coincidence. Maybe we frequented the same coffee shop or took the same bus line at some point. He never approached me, never even looked directly at me, so I dismissed it as my own overactive imagination. I work as a graphic designer for a small advertising firm downtown, a job I genuinely love, even if the hours can be brutal sometimes. My commute involves a 20-minute walk from my apartment to the train station, and that's where I'd usually spot him. Across the street, standing near a bus stop, lingering by a newsstand. He was always on the periphery, a background character in my life. Then it started to escalate, subtly at first. I'd find small objects on my doorstep. A smooth river stone, a single white feather, a child's plastic toy soldier. Initially, I thought it was neighborhood kids playing pranks. I live on the ground floor of a converted brownstone, so it wouldn't be difficult for someone to reach my stoop unnoticed. I threw the items away, annoyed but not particularly worried. The next thing I noticed was more unsettling. My social media started getting weird. I'd get friend requests from accounts with no profile pictures or very new accounts with odd names. I never accepted them, but the sheer volume was unnerving. Then came the comments on my posts. Nothing overtly threatening, just cryptic phrases that seemed vaguely connected to my life. Enjoying the view from your window on a picture I'd taken of the sunset from my living room. A good book for a rainy day on a post about a novel I was reading. I immediately blocked the accounts and tightened my privacy settings, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I started varying my route to work, taking different streets, leaving at different times. But no matter what I did, I'd still catch a glimpse of him, the guy in the black hoodie. He was like a shadow, always lurking just out of reach. He never said a word, never made a move, but his presence was suffocating. My anxiety was through the roof. I couldn't sleep. I barely ate and I jumped at every sudden noise. I told my roommate Sarah about what was happening, but she dismissed it as paranoia. "You're probably just stressed out from work," she said. "Maybe you should talk to someone." I knew she meant well, but her lack of concern made me feel even more isolated. Then one night I came home late from work. It was raining, a cold, miserable drizzle that seemed to seep into my bones. The street was deserted, the only sound the rhythmic drumming of the rain on the pavement. As I fumbled with my keys, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A figure standing across the street, partially obscured by the shadows. It was him, the guy in the black hoodie. He was just standing there, motionless, staring directly at me. For the first time, he wasn't on the periphery. He wasn't a background character. He was focused, intense, and terrifyingly present. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I finally managed to get the key in the lock and practically dove inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. Sarah came running into the hallway, concern etched on her face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to explain, my voice shaking, about the guy in the black hoodie, about the objects on my doorstep, about the cryptic comments. This time she listened, really listened. She saw the fear in my eyes, the genuine terror that had taken root in my soul. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "We're calling the police." We called the police, but they were less than helpful. They took a report, but said there wasn't much they could do without a direct threat or evidence of a crime. They advised me to get a restraining order, but that would require identifying him, which I couldn't do. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind sent shivers down my spine. I felt like I was trapped in a horror movie, waiting for the monster to appear. The next morning, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to do something, anything, to regain control of my life. I took a self-defense class, bought pepper spray, and started carrying a small personal alarm. I also started documenting everything, every time I saw him, every strange comment, every unsettling incident. A few weeks went by, and things seemed to calm down. I still saw him occasionally, but less frequently. Maybe he had moved on. Maybe he had found a new target. I started to relax, to breathe a little easier. Then, one afternoon, I came home from work to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My heart lurched into my throat. I cautiously pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was silent, but it was clear that someone had been there. Drawers were open, clothes were strewn across the floor, and my laptop was missing from my desk. But it wasn't the burglary that terrified me. It was the message scrawled on my bedroom mirror in bright red lipstick. "I'm always watching." I never felt unsafe until that moment when I saw that message in my home. That was when the stalking had truly broken into my safe space. The chill wasn't just in my spine, it permeated every corner of my existence. It wasn't just some random weirdo anymore. This was personal, intimate, and violently violating. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just being watched, I was being hunted. I moved out that night and never looked back. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, somewhere, watching. Story number 8. I used to think these stalker stories were made up, blown out of proportion for a cheap thrill. I thought, come on, how often does that really happen? And even if it does, surely you'd notice, right? You'd see the signs. I was so incredibly wrong. It started subtly, almost invisibly. I'm a freelance artist, mostly doing digital paintings and commissions. A lot of my work is online and showcasing my portfolio on various art platforms. It's how I get clients, how I pay my bills. So naturally, I have a public-facing presence, a necessary evil, I thought. At first, it was flattering. A new follower, someone leaving comments praising my work, even commissioning a piece. He went by the username Observer79. His profile was bare, no picture, no personal information, just that name. His first commission was simple enough, a portrait of his cat. Paid on time, polite in his emails, even left a generous tip. I didn't think twice. He came back a few weeks later with another commission, this time a landscape painting. Again, no issues. But with each commission, the requests got a little stranger. The landscapes started to resemble the view from my apartment window, though I didn't realize it at first. They were generic enough: trees, a park, buildings in the distance. But then he started requesting specific details. Could you add a red car parked on the street? The third window from the left on the 5th floor should have a plant. Things I hadn't mentioned, details he couldn't have known unless he was watching. The first real jolt of fear hit me when he requested a painting of my cat. He described her perfectly, right down to the small white patch on her chest. I hadn't posted any recent pictures of her online, and certainly not with that level of detail. I started to panic. I blocked him, changed my passwords, made my social media accounts private. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, I received a package. It was a painting of my cat, exactly as he had described. It was unsigned, but I knew it was him. A note was attached. "I just wanted you to have this. I know how much you love her." My blood ran cold. He knew where I lived. I called the police. They took a report, but without any direct threats, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested a security system. maybe a restraining order if he contacted me again. But they couldn't guarantee anything. The next few weeks were a living hell. I barely slept, jumping at every sound. I kept the blinds closed, peering out cautiously whenever I heard a noise outside. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Then came the gifts. Small, innocuous things left on my doorstep. A bag of my favorite coffee, a book by my favorite author, a packet of my favorite tea. Each one a reminder that he was there, watching, learning. I started to document everything, every gift, every strange email, every fleeting glimpse of a figure standing across the street. I became obsessed, consumed by the need to prove that I wasn't crazy, that this was really happening. One night I was working late, trying to finish a commission for a new client. I was exhausted, but I needed the money. Around 3 a.m., I heard a tapping on my window. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. I slowly peeked through the blinds. He was standing there on the fire escape, staring directly at me. He smiled. I screamed. I stumbled back from the window, tripping over my chair. By the time I got back up, he was gone. He was gone. I called the police again, hysterical. This time, they took me seriously. They arrived quickly, searched the building, but he was nowhere to be found. They installed security cameras around my apartment and promised to increase patrols in the area. But I couldn't stay there. I packed a bag, grabbed my cat, and drove to my sister's house a few hours away. I stayed there for weeks, terrified to go back. The police eventually identified Observer 79 as a man named David Miller, who lived in the same building as me. He had a history of stalking and harassment. They obtained a warrant for his arrest and started searching for him. A few weeks later, they found him. He had moved out of his apartment and disappeared. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but it was short-lived. The police warned me that he could resurface at any time and that I needed to be vigilant. I moved again, this time to a different state. I changed my name, my phone number, everything. I tried to rebuild my life, to forget what happened, but the fear never really goes away. I still check my locks multiple times a night. I still flinch at sudden noises. I still see his face in crowds. I'm writing this now because I received an email this morning. It was a new commission request, a landscape painting. The view from my new apartment window. The subject line, "I'm so glad I found you." I don't know what to do. I'm terrified. And I finally understand that these stories aren't made up. They're real, and they can happen to anyone. I feel like I'm in a real-life horror movie. I don't know how this story ends. I'm scared to know. Every little sound I hear, I get scared that he will break in. Every time I drive, I fear that his car will be behind me. Story number 9. I didn't realize the danger I was in until the teddy bear showed up on my doorstep. It wasn't a threatening-looking teddy bear. It was old, worn, missing an eye, and wearing a little knitted sweater that looked my grandmother might have made it. Honestly, at first, I felt a pang of sympathy for it. I even picked it up, thinking maybe it belonged to a kid in the building. I asked around, but nobody claimed it. I figured some kid had just dropped it and decided to keep it for a couple of days in case they came back. I lived in a small apartment building in a busy city, lots of people coming and going. I worked from home, so I was pretty much always around. It was safe, or so I thought. I had an online presence, sure. A couple of social media accounts, nothing crazy. I wasn't a big influencer or anything, just a regular person living a regular life. The teddy bear incident happened about a month after I'd started noticing some weird things. Small things, like my garbage can being moved from where I usually left it, or a faint smell of cigarette smoke in my hallway, even though nobody in my building smoked. I chalked it up to forgetfulness and the quirks of apartment living. But the teddy bear felt different. It felt deliberate. I threw it away. I know that sounds heartless, but something about it just creeped me out. I didn't want it in my apartment. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every creak of the building, every distant siren sounded like footsteps approaching my door. The next morning, I opened my door to find the teddy bear sitting there again. My blood ran cold. I didn't touch it. I called the police. They came, took a report, and shrugged. No crime had been committed. They suggested I get a security camera, easy for them to say. I bought a camera that day, a cheap one that stuck to my door frame. I aimed it at the hallway, hoping to catch whoever was messing with me. I barely slept that night, constantly checking the live feed on my phone. Nothing. The next day, the teddy bear was gone. Relief washed over me. Maybe it was just a prank. Maybe the person got bored. I tried to put it out of my mind. I focused on my work, tried to relax. A week went by. No teddy bear, no weird occurrences. I started to feel like I was going crazy. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Then the packages started arriving, small, innocuous packages. A book I'd mentioned wanting to read in a throwaway comment on a friend's social media post. A specific brand of tea I liked that was hard to find in stores. A vintage scarf that looked exactly like one my grandmother used to wear. Each package was addressed to me but had no return address. I was terrified. This wasn't just a prank anymore. This was targeted. This was someone who knew me. Someone who was watching me. I went back to the police, showed them the packages. Again, they said there was nothing they could do. No threats had been made. No laws had been broken. He's just being a creep, one of the officers said dismissively. Ignore him and he'll probably go away. Ignoring him was impossible. I stopped opening the packages. They piled up outside my door, a constant reminder that I was being watched. I barely left my apartment. I lost sleep. I stopped eating. I was living in a constant state of anxiety. Then, one night, I woke up to a sound, a soft tapping on my window. I lived on the third floor. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and crept to the window. I peeked through the blinds. There, standing on the fire escape, was a figure. I couldn't make out their face in the darkness, but I could see they were holding something. The teddy bear. They tapped it against the window, slowly, deliberately, their head tilted slightly as if they were watching me. I screamed. The figure froze, then slowly backed away and disappeared into the darkness. I called the police again, hysterical. This time they took me seriously. They searched the fire escape, searched the building, but found nothing. No sign of forced entry. No witnesses. They did, however, find something on my roof. A makeshift campsite. Sleeping bags, some empty food containers, and a pair of binoculars. Someone had been living on my roof, watching me. They dusted everything for prints, but the results came back inconclusive. I was no longer safe. Not in my apartment. Not anywhere. I moved. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I changed my name, got a new job, started a new life. But I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every time I see a teddy bear, I freeze. Every time I hear a tapping on the window, my heart stops. I don't know who he was or what he wanted. I don't know if he's still out there looking for me. All I know is that I didn't realize the danger I was in until it was too late. I only pray that someone else who gets a worn-out teddy bear on their doorstep will realize it before they are put in my position. Story number 10. Okay, so rewind to 2012. I was a sophomore in college, living in a small, off-campus apartment with two roommates. We were your typical broke college students, ramen eating, Netflix binging, barely making it types. My life was pretty normal, maybe even a little boring, until it wasn't. It started subtly, little things that I brushed off as coincidence. I'd see the same car, a beat-up dark blue sedan, parked down the street from my apartment a few times a week. I figured it was just someone who lived in the neighborhood. Then I started noticing it parked across the street from my classes. Still, I didn't think much of it. College campuses are public places. But then, things started to escalate. I'd get these weird, anonymous texts. Nothing threatening, just unsettling. Stuff like, nice sweater today, or hope you enjoyed your coffee at the library. They always referenced something specific I had done that day, something small that I wouldn't have thought anyone noticed. I blocked the number, but the texts kept coming from different burner phones. It was like playing whack-a-mole with my sanity. I started feeling like I was being watched constantly. I'd catch glimpses of someone out of the corner of my eye, a man with dark hair and a baseball cap. But when I turned to look, he'd be gone. I started walking faster, avoiding dark alleys, always looking over my shoulder. I felt like prey. One night, I was walking home from a late-night study session at the library. It was around 11 p.m., and the streets were mostly deserted. As I rounded the corner onto my street, I saw the dark blue sedan parked directly in front of my apartment building. The headlights were off, and the engine was silent. My blood ran cold. I froze, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to go inside, but I didn't want to stay out in the open either. I pulled out my phone and pretended to text someone, hoping whoever was in the car would think I was calling for help. After what felt like an eternity, the car slowly pulled away and disappeared down the street. I ran inside, heart pounding, and locked the door behind me. I told my roommates everything that had been happening. They were freaked out, but also a little skeptical. They suggested I was just being paranoid, that maybe I was imagining things. But I knew I wasn't. We decided to call the police. I spent hours giving them a statement, describing the car, the texts, the feeling of being watched. They took it seriously, but there wasn't much they could do without any concrete evidence. They said they'd increase patrols in the area, but that was it. The next few weeks were a living hell. I was constantly on edge, terrified to leave my apartment. I started having nightmares, vivid dreams of being chased and trapped. I lost weight, couldn't focus on my studies, and became a shell of my former self. One night, I woke up to a tapping sound at my window. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart racing. I peered through the blinds and saw him, the man with the dark hair and the baseball cap. He was standing in the shadows, staring directly at my window, tapping lightly on the glass with his fingernail. I screamed. My roommates came running into my room, and the man took off, disappearing into the darkness. We called the police again, but by the time they arrived, he was long gone. This time, they took it more seriously. They dusted for fingerprints, interviewed my neighbors, and started a real investigation. A few days later, they caught him. It turned out he was a former classmate of mine, someone I had barely spoken to. He had been obsessed with me for months, tracking my every move, sending the anonymous texts, and watching me from afar. He had even broken into my apartment once while I was away, just to look around. The police found a detailed journal in his apartment filled with entries about me. He wrote about my clothes, my habits, my dreams. It was horrifying. He was charged with stalking, harassment, and trespassing. He eventually pled guilty and was sentenced to several years in prison. Even though he's behind bars, I still struggle with the aftermath of what happened. I have trust issues, anxiety, and a constant feeling of vulnerability. I moved to a different city, changed my name, and tried to start over. But the fear never really goes away. I still look over my shoulder, still have nightmares, still feel like I'm being watched sometimes. The scariest part of this whole experience is that it could happen to anyone. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how careful you are, or how normal your life is. Stalkers can be anyone. Classmates, coworkers, even strangers. They can be lurking in the shadows, watching your every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. And that's the real horror of it all. The knowledge that someone out there could be obsessed with you, that your privacy can be violated, that your safety can be threatened at any moment. It's a chilling reminder that we're all vulnerable, and that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones that hide in plain sight. It is still a terrifying thing that has happened to me, and it can happen to anyone. Story number 11. Okay, so this is a story I really don't like telling, mostly because even years later, it still freaks me out. It happened when I was in my early 20s, living in a small apartment in the city. I was working a dead-end retail job and honestly just trying to figure things out. I was pretty active on social media, posting the usual stuff, pictures with friends, weekend outings, complaining about work. Nothing too personal, or so I thought. It started subtly. I'd notice a car parked across the street from my apartment building, a dark sedan always there when I left for work and when I came home. I I didn't think much of it at first. City living, right? But then I started seeing it other places, at the grocery store, a few blocks from my work, even once when I was grabbing coffee with a friend in a completely different part of town. Each time, the driver was obscured from either wearing sunglasses or parked in a way that made it hard to see. I mentioned it to a few friends, and they told me I was being paranoid. It's probably just a coincidence, they said. You live in a city, cars are everywhere. Um, I tried to brush it off, but the feeling of being watched was creeping under my skin. Then came the messages. I started getting anonymous messages on Instagram. They weren't overtly threatening, just unsettling. Things like, nice new haircut, or that coffee shop is overpriced, don't you think? Or hope you have a good day at work. They were always timed perfectly, like right after I'd left the salon or while I was walking to my job. It was like someone was watching me in real time. I blocked the account immediately, but new ones kept popping up, each message more unnerving than the last. One time the message was, "That blue dress looks great on you," which was especially creepy because I hadn't posted a picture of myself in that dress. I had only worn it to a friend's birthday party the night before. That's when I knew this wasn't just some random internet troll. This was someone who knew me, who was physically near me. I started changing my routines. I took different routes to work, stopped going to my favorite coffee shop, and tried to vary my schedule as much as possible. I even started carrying pepper spray. It was exhausting, living in constant fear. I reported the messages to Instagram, but they said there wasn't enough evidence to identify the sender. The police weren't much help either, telling me to come back if anything actually happened. One Saturday, I decided to stay in and have a movie night. I ordered pizza, locked all the doors and windows, and tried to relax. I turned off all the lights except for a small lamp and settled in on the couch. About halfway through the movie, I heard a tapping on my window. I froze. My apartment was on the second floor. There was no way someone could just be tapping on my window. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe a branch hitting the glass. But the tapping persisted, a slow, deliberate rhythm that sent shivers down my spine. I peeked through the blinds, and that's when I saw him. Standing on the fire escape, illuminated by the streetlights, was a man. I couldn't see his face clearly, but he was tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie. He was staring directly at my window, his hand raised, tapping gently on the glass. He knew I was there, watching him. I screamed, jumped up, and ran to the phone to call 911. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They searched the area but couldn't find him. They took a report, told me to be careful, and left. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I went to the building manager and asked to have the locks changed. I also installed security cameras inside my apartment and a motion sensor light on the fire escape. I felt a little safer, but the fear was still there, lurking in the back of my mind. A few weeks went by, and things were quiet. I started to think maybe he had given up, that maybe I was finally safe. Then, one morning, I found a package on my doorstep. It was a small, unmarked box. I hesitated before opening it, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside, there was a single object, a picture of myself, taken through my apartment window. It was a picture of me sitting on the couch, watching the movie, the night he was on the fire escape. Scrawled across the back of the photo were two words: "I'm close." That was it. I couldn't live like that anymore. I broke my lease, packed my bags, and moved back in with my parents in another state. I changed my phone number, deleted all my social media accounts, and tried to disappear. It's been years since that happened, and I still get chills thinking about it. I don't know who he was, what he wanted, or why he was targeting me. I've tried to move on with my life, but the fear is always there, a constant reminder of how vulnerable we all are. To this day, I'm extremely careful about what I share online, and I always make sure to lock my doors and windows at night. I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe again. Sometimes I get those same messages, but now I just delete them. This will never end. Story number 12. Okay, here goes nothing. I've never actually voiced this out loud or even written it down, so bear with me. It's not like a ghost story or anything supernatural. It's just real, and that's what makes it so terrifying. It started innocently enough. I was working at a small local bookstore back in my early 20s. I loved it there. Surrounded by books, chatting with customers, just a really chill vibe. There was this one guy, Mark, who started coming in pretty regularly. He was quiet, a little awkward, but seemed nice enough. He'd always browse the sci-fi section, and we'd occasionally talk about whatever book he was buying. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's a bookstore, people come and go. But he started coming in more and more often, like every other day. And it always seemed to be when I was working. He'd linger, make small talk, ask for recommendations, even when he clearly wasn't going to buy anything. Then he started waiting for me to get off work. I'd walk out, and he'd be standing there, leaning against his car, like it was the most normal thing in the world. He'd offer me a ride home or to grab a coffee. I always politely declined, saying I had plans or needed to run errands. That's when the gifts started. Little things at first. A bookmark, a keychain with a quote from one of the books we'd talked about. Harmless, right? But they kept coming, more frequently and more personal. a mixed CD with songs he thought I'd like, a small hand-painted rock with a flower on it I had mentioned liking gardening once. It was definitely crossing a line, but I still didn't want to cause a scene. I was young and honestly a little naive. I didn't want to be rude, didn't want to embarrass him. I just kept trying to subtly distance myself. Shorter conversations, avoiding eye contact, making excuses to not be around him. But he wasn't getting the message. One day, I came into work and found a small, wrapped package on my desk. It was a necklace, a silver chain with a tiny, intricate book pendant. It was actually really beautiful, but the thought of wearing something he'd given me made my skin crawl. That was the breaking point. I knew I had to say something. I waited for him to come in that afternoon. When he did, I took a deep breath and tried to be as gentle as possible. I told him I appreciated the thought, but I wasn't comfortable with the gifts. I told him I enjoyed our chats at the bookstore, but I wasn't interested in anything more. He didn't say anything at first. He just stared at me with this intense look in his eyes. Then he finally spoke, his voice low and almost pleading. He said he just wanted to be my friend, that he admired me, that he only wanted to make me happy. I repeated that I wasn't interested and asked him to please respect my boundaries. He finally nodded, but I could tell he wasn't really listening. He was just waiting for me to stop talking. Things got worse after that. He still came into the bookstore, but now he wouldn't even look at me. He'd just stand in the sci-fi section, staring at the shelves like he was waiting for something. It was incredibly unnerving. Then came the emails. He somehow found my personal email address, I still don't know how, and started sending me messages. They weren't threatening, not at first, just long, rambling messages about how much he cared about me, how he knew we were meant to be together, how he could make me happy if I just gave him a chance. I blocked his email address, but he just created new ones. It was a constant stream of unwanted attention. The real fear set in when I started noticing him in places that weren't the bookstore. I'd see him at the grocery store, at the coffee shop, even walking down the street near my apartment. It was always just a glimpse, a fleeting moment, but it was enough to make me feel like I was being watched. I started taking different routes home, varying my schedule, trying to be more aware of my surroundings. I was constantly looking over my shoulder. One night, I was walking home from a friend's house. It was late, and the streets were mostly deserted. I had this overwhelming feeling that I wasn't alone. I started walking faster, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I saw him. He was standing across the street under a streetlight, just watching me. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I considered running, but I was afraid he'd chase me. I just stood there, paralyzed with fear. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching me with that same intense look in his eyes. After what felt like an eternity, I finally found the courage to move. I turned and ran, as fast as I could, all the way to my apartment. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and didn't sleep a wink that night. The next day, I went to the police. I told them everything. The gifts, the emails, the sightings. They took a report, but they said there wasn't much they could do unless he actually threatened me or physically harmed me. I felt completely helpless. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, living in fear. So I decided to move. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my closest friends. I packed my bags, said goodbye to my life, and started over somewhere new. It's been years since then. I haven't seen or heard from Mark since I left, but the fear still lingers. I still find myself looking over my shoulder, wondering if he's out there, watching me. I've never told anyone this story before because it feels embarrassing, like I somehow brought this on myself. But the truth is, I was just a young woman trying to live her life, and I was targeted by someone who couldn't respect boundaries. It's a reminder that even the most seemingly harmless interactions can turn into something terrifying, and that sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to disappear completely. Story number 13. Okay, so this is a story I almost never tell, partly because it still freaks me out, and partly because it makes me sound like the world's biggest idiot. But hey, you asked for it. It started innocently enough. I was in my early 20s, living in a small college town, working a dead-end job at a coffee shop. I was bored, restless, and like a lot of people back then, way too trusting of strangers on the internet. I joined a local online forum for people interested in photography. I loved taking pictures, mostly landscapes and nature stuff, and thought it would be a good way to meet like minded people. There was this one guy, Pixel Painter 78, I know, super original, who posted some really stunning photos. He had a great eye, and his composition was always perfect. I commented on a few of his posts, just saying how much I admired his work, and he messaged me privately to say thanks. We started chatting, mostly about photography stuff, techniques, equipment, that kind of thing. He seemed nice enough, a little intense maybe, but nothing that set off any major alarm bells. He suggested we meet up sometime to go shooting together. I hesitated at first. I wasn't usually one to meet strangers from the internet, but he seemed genuine, and I really wanted to improve my photography. Plus, I figured meeting in a public place during the day would be safe enough. We arranged to meet at a local park known for its scenic trails. He was taller than I expected, maybe 6 feet, with a kind of lanky build and intense blue eyes. He had a camera bag slung over his shoulder and a friendly smile. We chatted easily as we walked along the trails, taking pictures of the scenery. He gave me some helpful tips on adjusting my settings and finding the right angles. It was actually a really pleasant afternoon. After a few hours, we grabbed some coffee at a cafe near the park. He asked me a lot of questions about myself, where I lived, what I did for work, what my hobbies were. I answered honestly, not thinking anything of it. He shared some details about his life too, but now that I think about it, they were all pretty vague. He never mentioned his real name, where he worked, or anything that could be easily verified. We parted ways after coffee, and I thought that was the end of it. I'd had a nice afternoon, learned a few things about photography, and met someone new. No big deal, right? Wrong. The next day, I got a message from him on the forum. He said he'd had a great time and wanted to hang out again soon. I politely declined, saying I was busy with work and other commitments. He seemed a little disappointed, but he didn't push it. But then the messages kept coming. Every day, multiple times a day. At first, they were just friendly messages asking how I was, sharing photography tips, or sending links to interesting articles. But then they started getting more personal, more intense. He'd mentioned things I'd told him during our coffee date, things that I didn't remember sharing with him. He'd say things like, I hope you had a good day at work today, even though I know how much you hate dealing with those grumpy customers. How did he know that? He also started showing up at the coffee shop where I worked. He'd order a coffee, sit at a table, and just stare at me. It made me incredibly uncomfortable. I tried to avoid eye contact, but he'd always find a way to catch my gaze. He'd smile that same friendly smile, but now it felt different, more sinister. I started taking different routes to work, hoping to avoid him, but somehow he always seemed to know where I was. One time, I was walking home from a friend's house late at night, and I saw him standing across the street, just watching me. I froze, paralyzed with fear. He didn't say anything, didn't move. He just stood there, shrouded in shadow, his eyes fixed on me. I ran the rest of the way home, locked the door, and didn't sleep a wink that night. I finally confided in a friend about what was happening. She was horrified and urged me to go to the police. I was hesitant. I didn't have any concrete evidence, just a series of unsettling encounters. I was afraid they wouldn't take me seriously. But my friend convinced me that it was better to be safe than sorry. So I went to the police station and filed a report. The officer I spoke to was sympathetic, but he said there wasn't much they could do unless Pixel Painter 78 actually threatened me or physically harmed me. He advised me to keep a record of all interactions with him and to call them if anything escalated. I felt defeated. The police couldn't help me, and I was completely on my own. I started living in a constant state of anxiety, always looking over my shoulder, afraid of what Pixel Painter 78 might do next. Then one day, I got a message from him that sent a shiver down my spine. It was a picture of my apartment building, taken from across the street. The message said, I see you. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag, left a note for my roommate, and drove to my parents' house in another state. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my friend. I just disappeared. I stayed with my parents for several months trying to recover from the trauma. I changed my phone number, deleted all my social media accounts, and basically erased myself from the internet. I eventually moved back to my old town, but I never went back to my old apartment. I found a new job, made new friends, and tried to rebuild my life. To this day, I still get chills thinking about Pixel Painter 78. I never found out who he was or what he wanted, but I know that he changed me forever. I'm much more cautious now, much more aware of the dangers of the internet, and I'll never again trust a stranger, no matter how charming or seemingly harmless they may seem. I think that going on the internet and meeting people online has its benefits. However, it also has its dangers and problems, as this horror story has stated. Please be aware of where you meet people, as you never know what their true identity is. And so, the story ends. But the silence it leaves behind, that lingers. If your heart's still racing, if you're still glancing over your shoulder, then maybe, just maybe, you've truly heard the whispers from the void. Thank you for walking with us through the dark. If this tale left its mark, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and share your thoughts below, because in Hollow Testament, you're never really alone. We'll return soon with another story that bites, scratches, and stays with you long after the screen goes dark. Until then, sleep well, if you can.